These are the instructions for the pencil roll project that we are starting with our level 2 sewing. This video is just going to give you a quick explanation of how to do this project. It's a simple project, very easy for you to handle. There are some areas though that I think you need to be cautious. The parts of the project need to be sewn really straight. And so that's the thing that I will be emphasizing. This is what it looks like. It just looks like a little roll of fabric. When you unroll it, it has pockets for individual tools. You can use it for pencils. You could use it for sewing equipment, makeup, lots and lots of options. This one is not completed yet because I'm using it as my example. So you can see that there are stitching lines, and I haven't finished them over here at this side. If you were going to make these individually to sell, besides to the company that we might work with, you could change the size of the pockets. You could make one stitch like right here, and that could be a makeup pocket. But the project that we're doing has pencil pocket dividers all the way across. So it really is very simple. But if you don't sew it correctly, as with everything, it's not going to look right. And so I want to go over some of the things that we need to make sure you do correctly. There is an evaluation sheet that I've given to Olivia, and we are going to give you that evaluation sheet at the beginning of the project so that you have a clear view of what we will be looking for, and hopefully you'll be able to easily meet those expectations. You will be receiving a packet, and just a Ziploc bag with your materials in it. And inside you'll have a set of instruction sheets. And I've tried to make the pictures as clear as possible. The video that I'm going to be doing is just really going to go right along with this, so that you'll have a visual representation if you need it also. You will have your pattern pieces. You have pattern piece A, which is the back or the outside of the project, and pattern piece B. As you read through your instructions, make sure you know which of these is A and which is B. Your instructions will refer to them by their letters. Then you have two measuring tools that I'll explain in a minute. We just threw in some variations of colored thread that you'll be able to use. It doesn't have to match exactly, but choose the color that looks good with it. If you have another color at home that looks better with your material, go ahead and use that. But as long as your thread, you use the same color all the way through the project. Make sure you don't switch back and forth. And then you'll also have a tie and a piece of ribbon of some sort. We're not sure what color will go in each kit. We're using what we already have at the center, but you will have some kind of ribbon that goes on the top of the project. Okay, and then additionally you will have your fabric. Now, right now we're just making a practice project so that you have an opportunity to make mistakes, I guess I would say, without it affecting your income. We're not paying you for this one. In essence, we're letting you make any mistakes that you have, and then that way when you get to the actual job, you'll be able to make them quickly with fewer mistakes. Okay, in addition to the items I just showed you in your kit, you will also have material for your project. Now, it may be that the material is just kind of a random stack of material, and there is no requirement on how the materials go together. If you like pink and black and you think that's going to sell to the public, then go ahead and put them together, but try to make them look interesting or cute, or you can make them so that they're for little boys, little girls. Make them for older looking teenagers or older teenagers or whatever. But you should have plenty of material in each of your kits to make 2 or 3 of these. But you're only required to make 1 right now. All right, so let's get started with the instructions. The first thing, ladies, I just can't emphasize this enough. So I am going to emphasize it again because it's just so important. I know that many of you were waiting for the video to come along, and videos are a wonderful way to learn. But I also know that it's true that with sewing, you're not going to have videos available for every project that you do. And it will be the most benefit to you if you can take the time and the effort to really read through your instructions. It's confusing at times. It's much easier for someone just to show you physically, but unfortunately that's not the way it works very often. So please, please read and use the video and the written instructions together, and then that will help you clarify how to read instructions. Then the next time you won't need the video perhaps and can work just with instructions. So the key to successfully reading the instructions is to make sure that you complete each step, read each step, think it through, then complete the step, and then move on to the next step. You're not going to try to read, an entire section. You're not going to read all of those instructions and then look at this picture and go, I don't understand what it says. Okay, take it one step at a time. It says cut 1 layer of each pattern piece A and B. And this is your outside fabric. So this is what will be on one side of fabric, and then I'm going to have one that's on the inside, which we refer to as the lining. So we're going to have an outside fabric, and we're going to have an inside fabric. Okay? Now, the outside fabric I have put here. You can, well, never mind. I'm sorry. I'll go back and explain that later. Right now, you just need to cut, as it says, exactly as it says, cut 1 layer of fabric from each pattern piece. So I'm going to have 1 layer of A and 1 layer of B. Here's my pattern B to give you an example. 1 layer of A and 1 layer of B out of each of my 2 fabrics. I'm choosing to use this one as my outside fabric. Okay. Now, so I've done step 1. Now it says cut a 2nd layer out of the fabric that you will be putting on the inside of the project. So again, using my pattern piece, I simply took the pattern piece, laid it on my material, pinned it down, and cut my project out, just as you would with any project. Okay. Here's piece A, and then that gives me that piece. And now we're going to do the same thing with piece B. So pattern piece B, and I'm going to cut 1 layer of pattern piece B out of my 2nd fabric. So I've got 2 of each. I've got 2 of pattern B, and I've got 2 of pattern A. Additionally, the next step says cut 1 layer of padding. This is sometimes called batting, okay, but it's just to give the fabric a little bit of poofiness. So I'm going to take again pattern A, and I'm going to cut this out to fit. When you're cutting, remember that you cut around the solid line, only the ones that are around the outside edge. Do not cut across this line. This is a placement line for where we're going to be sewing some ribbon. So only the outside 4 edges. Okay, so you're done with, that takes care of this whole page. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to make sure I've done what it says on this page and then move on to the next one. Okay, the next page says to mark with a pencil or chalk. I'm going to try to find something that should show up easily on the material that I'm using. So I'm going to use these 2 colored pencil or pieces of, they're actually chalk, I think. I'm going to use those, or maybe I'm going to use this. I could use a regular pencil. Don't use a pen, and don't use a fabric, or don't use a marker like this kind of a marker, because it will bleed into your material. Okay, so I've done one step. I've gotten my tools. So it says to mark the large piece A, lining fabric. Lining means this is the one that I've chosen to be the inside of the project. Okay. So in this case, the lining fabric is the orange. That's what's going on the inside of the project. This is the outer fabric. Okay, so they want me to mark, it says to mark the bias placement line. And I'm going to switch these around so you can see this. So the bias placement line, and it doesn't matter how many times you write an instruction, there's always something you find later that could have been done differently. I put twill tape, which I just noticed. Bias tape and twill tape are the same thing. They just have different names. So these are the same, okay? All right. So they want me to mark the bias placement line and the tie placement line. We've done this before, where we're taking instructions from a piece of paper and transferring those instructions to the material. Okay, it wants me to trace, this is on the right side of the fabric. Okay. So my lining, remember for me, is the red. So I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to take my pattern, put it back on here, and I am going to make a line where the tie placement line is, and the placement line doesn't have to be any specific length. We really just want to know where the tie is going to be sewn. So for me, I'm going to take my pattern and I'm just going to tip it back, and my placement line is right here. Okay. That's all I need to do. Now, on the upper part, the twill tape line, to make it easier, I've given you a little green measuring tool. This placement line is actually 4 centimeters from the top of the project. So to make it easy, I thought I would just give you this little 4 centimeter piece. You can just line it up at the top of your project, and then again, either taking a pencil or chalk, whatever works for you, you're just going to go along and mark that line. Just make sure that your project has been cut straight, evenly. You can like right here, it looks like my project goes up a little. I could go back and smooth that upper edge before I do the measuring if I needed to. You can see that my line is not very dark, and it doesn't need to be. It's just one little line you're going to look at once, in essence. when you put the tape on. We do all of the marking before we start sewing because it's faster, even though right now it seems like it's pretty slow. It really is faster. Okay, and on my instructions, it also says to mark the leave open section. Okay, and the leave open section you should be able to see over here. We need to be able to turn this bag right side out, or this project. And so again, I'm just going to slide my pattern over, and I'm just going to make a little X where that should be. Okay, look at your instructions and see if you have completed everything that it says to do right here. Okay, so we did the tie placement line, we did the bias tape line, and we did the leave open line. Okay, all right, next, so we're finished with this section. Next, it says on the wrong side of the outer fabric. So now I need to switch to the blue fabric, which is my outside. Okay, switching to the blue fabric, it says to, on the wrong side, this is the wrong side, on the wrong side, mark the 4 turning points. When we sew around this, we are going to be using a 1/4 of an inch seam. Now, you shouldn't need to mark the seam line because we know that we have the mark on the sewing machine. But sometimes it's hard to determine where exactly we should be turning. Let's see, can you see that mark? Yeah, okay, that shows up fairly well. So what I need to do is take my seam gauge, and of course your seam gauge is a measuring tool. Okay, this is your seam gauge, your little measuring tool, and we're going to use it to make to mark the corners. Before I mark the corners, I'm actually going to take the outside and the lining layers. We're going to put those together, and we're going to make sure that we've cut them so that they are evenly cut. Hardly ever do we cut perfectly straight. When you're doing something that is like this project, it is a good idea to double check that. You can see that in reality, my blue piece is a little bit smaller than my red piece. So if I fix that now, it will avoid problems later. I also want to take, excuse me, I also want to take my project and fold it in half and see, does the, from left to right, sorry, hang on. Okay, what, from left to right, are these two pieces the same? If they're not, you can see right here that, again, the blue is just a fraction of an inch off. It's going to make a difference. And then I want to fold it this way and see if these two edges are even. If they're not, cut it. One way that you can avoid having to cut these pieces twice is to make to use a ruler and a rotary cutter. So if I were to cut this, I can cut the 2 layers all at once. So by just stacking them on top of each other and using a rotary cutter, then I know that I'm getting them exactly even. And all of these hints, you guys, again, it's just to make it easier when you get sewing and actually when you're finished your project, to look at your project and not have to go back and redo anything. Having it straight now will make it easier in the long run. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to double check the other sides. Okay, and yes, they are just a little bit off. And I would want to I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure out, try not to cut very much off. So if I look at this, the measurement on this would be 3 3/4. It looks like 3 3/4. So that is the distance that I want this to be all the way across. 3 3/4, so that I know that I'm getting the project evenly spaced. Yeah. Okay, so just like I did on the bottom, on the other side, I'm just going to line my ruler up quickly and go back and make sure I'm on the right line. So I'm only cutting a bit off. Finish that up. As with any of the projects that you've done in sewing, this first project may take you a little bit of time. And you're going to think, this isn't a fast, easy project. Well, it might not be a fast, easy project the first time, but I can guarantee it will be a faster, easier project the second time. And especially if you do it correctly the first time. Okay, so I'm going to take my pockets and I'm also going to measure those just the same way. All right. Okay, we've done instruction 4. Now we're on to, or 2, now we're on to instruction 4, and it says to mark the wrong side of the outer fabric. That's this, the blue, the wrong side. We're going to mark where we need to turn as we're sewing. And all of the seam lines in your project are 1/4 of an inch. Okay, on this tool, 1/4 of an inch. Here's 1 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1/4 inch is here. So if I read it by quarters, it's 1/4 inch, okay, on our seam gauge, 1/4 of an inch is the first kind longer line you reach. So there's 1/4 of an inch. It's a very small amount, and it's hard to determine on your machine when it's time for you to turn. There's a line that helps you easily see where you should sew if you're going straight, but the turning line is a little bit hard to find. So I'm just going to take, and I'm going to measure from one edge over, and I'm going to put a dot where the 1/4 inch is. I'm going to move up from the bottom, and I'm going to put a dot where the 1/4 inch is. Where those two marks line up, that's where my needle is going to be when I turn. And we just want to do that on each corner. And again, ladies, please, I know it may sound like this is doing too much work before you begin to sew, but what you do before is going to make the actual sewing process easier. I guarantee. So there's my 1/4 on that side. Here's my 1/4 on this side. So when I'm sewing, I'm going to turn when the needle gets right here. Okay, I'm just going to do the other 2 corners. Okay, I've marked all of the corners, as you can see. There's one over here that you can see easily. So now I go to the last line on my paper, and I see that I've done this, so now I'm finished with that page. So we're on to the next page of the instructions. The next page of our instructions is going to have us start the actual sewing process. So we've cut out, we've marked, M-A-R-K-E-D, we've marked our fabric, and now we're ready to start sewing it together. If your fabric is wrinkled, you can iron it. if it's has a few folds in it, like this one does, if you think it's going to affect the way that the fabric lays when you're sewing, then definitely take 10 seconds and iron it. But for most of your fabrics, you won't need to do that. Okay, so step number 1 on the sewing. Reading our first step of the instructions, it says, I'm going to be using the small piece B. Okay, here's my piece B. It says, I want to put right sides together. That's the good side and the good side of piece B. Remember, so we're on piece B, so we're on the small piece. Now, don't read the rest of them. It'll confuse you. It says step A, or 1, is put them together, line them up along one long edge. One long edge. And now I am supposed to sew across there a 1/4 of an inch seam line. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you some hints. And once you get the idea of your instructions, the rest of this process goes really quickly. I think you should be able to make these projects in about maybe 45 minutes, eventually probably in about 30 minutes. You should be able to make each one. Okay, on the way to the sewing machine. Okay, our first actual sewing instructions, it says to put right sides together. Now again, we're looking at piece B, which are the inside pocket pieces, or I'm sorry, the pocket pieces. So pieces B are these 2 shorter pieces, right? Okay, and it says right sides together. Now, on my red piece, both sides of my red piece are the same, but I would want to put that red piece on top of the dark side of this piece. Wrong side, right side. Right sides together, line it up as if you would on any sewing project. And we've checked to make sure that they were even in cutting. You can pin these. I would pin them at least a couple of times. It doesn't need to be a significant number, but you just want to make sure that those top edges don't shift apart from each other. Okay. All right, now I've chosen to use a very light colored thread on my machine so it will show up in the video. But you can use, as I said before, you can use any color that you want. Just be consistent throughout. So even though this is red and blue mainly, if I wanted to sew this in black, it would be fine. Or if I wanted to sew it in white. Just make it, I probably wouldn't sew it in, bright orange or green, but just make it look decent with the fabric that you're using. Okay, and we're going to be using a 1/4 of an inch seam. Don't go on to the next part because that's going to confuse you. We need to do one step at a time. So sew it. That's what we need to do. Stitch a 1/4 inch seam. 1/4 inch is